Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We apologize for the late start. We were having some technical difficulties. We will be having closed caption. You see that at the bottom of your screen. If you need Spanish interpretation, please click on that icon. Today's webinar is Accommodations and Modifications in an Online World. It's going to be presented by Shirley Swope and Missy Cedars. My name is Pam Christie. I'm the PTI director here at Peak Parent Center, and I will be monitoring your chat. So before we get started, I just want to go over a few ways to participate in today's meeting. Everyone will be muted. And then if we have time at the end, we possibly will unmute you, but since we started late, I don't know if we'll have time. I will be monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions throughout this webinar, please put those in the chat, or if there's time at the end, for sure we'll open that up for Q&A. The PowerPoint and handouts were emailed to you on Monday, so I hope you have those available. And as you leave today's webinar, you will receive an evaluation form about this presentation, and we would appreciate if you just take a few minutes to complete that and provide your feedback. We're always trying to make improvements here at Peak Parent Center. So it's my pleasure to introduce Missy and Shirley. We'll take it from here.
Hello, everybody. Missy Cedars. I'm a parent advisor for Peak Parent Center. We are really happy to have you for accommodations and modifications in an online world. And I think Shirley's cat might help us out today too, I saw. So I've been with Peak 7 years and do parent advising, help explain education, bring stuff to you guys. And what brought me to Peak years ago is I have 2 children. My oldest daughter is 20 and attends the University of New Mexico. And my youngest daughter is 16 and she has an intellectual disability and is a freshman in high school. So she brought me to Peak a long time ago as a client, and I was glad to join as a helper several years ago. So for those of you that aren't familiar at Peak, we are the Parent Training and Information Center for the state of Colorado. But what we're really, really passionate about is making sure that all people, disabilities, all abilities can participate effectively and inclusively in their communities, which begins at school. So we focus on helping families, educators, service providers, education administrators, making sure that they're helping kids get the best education they can, no matter what abilities they bring to the table. Shirley?
And I'm Shirley Swope, another parent advisor at Peak Parent Center. And I was a former teacher before I joined Peak, but I have 3 children. My oldest son has a severe hearing loss, and that's kind of what drew me down this road. And we're very glad that you're here today, and let's get started.
Excellent. I'll share my PowerPoint here in a minute. I do want to let you know that accommodations and modifications is a huge topic. And we did provide a lot of details in the handout for you. So make sure you go back and look for that reminder from Pam that has the handouts attached to it, because there's way more in there than we could possibly get through in our time here. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Slideshow.
I'm trying to get there. There we go. It was hiding.
I know.
The little green menu was hiding everything. So we always like to start with this cartoon. Placing a child with a disability in a general education classroom is not enough to be included. It's just a foot in the door. And really, accommodations and modifications are to make sure that once that child gets a foot in the door, they actually have real access to the general education curriculum. And Shirley will talk about it in a little more depth, but the original law that started focusing on getting kids access to the general education curriculum, the Education for Handicapped Children's Act, started in 1975. And it's 2021 and we're still working on it. So we've made some progress, but there's still more to go. I just want to say that with COVID, nothing in IDEA changed. Nothing in the law changed. No matter how kids are going to school, they still should have access at the appropriate level for them to the general education curriculum. And that's what accommodations and modifications help us do. So now I'll let Shirley talk a little bit more about the law.
Okay, and what does the law say? And Missy's right. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act has been around for a long time. And at the very beginning of the act, it was guaranteeing that students got a free, appropriate public education. And that was kind of based on a civil rights law that came before that, which was the Rehab Act of 1973, which is really a civil rights law, not an education law, that states if you're an agency that receives federal funds, you can't discriminate against someone with a disability, and that includes schools. And then in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, came into play, and that's a very large civil rights act that prohibits discrimination. Schools have to comply with that too, for access for parents who have disabilities, who need wheelchair ramps to come to their children's plays or awards or whatever, and for teachers who use wheelchairs or teachers who are deaf. So schools have to comply with these laws, and it's in there, it's embedded in there, and it's part of our culture now. Next. So the federal requirements for least restrictive environment, or LRE, really state that you use these supplementary aids and services to provide education in the general education environment. And only if you can't, and the child can't learn in that setting without the supplementary aids and services, that you get to move away from that environment. But always your beginning point for a child to go to school is the classroom the child would attend if that child did not have a disability. Adding supplementary aids and services. What are accommodations and modifications? They are supplementary aids and services. Next. So under the IDEA, the definition of supplementary aids and services means services and other supports that are provided in regular classes. A special education classroom is not regular education. And other education related settings. What's that? It's the gym, it's PE class, it's music class, it's art class. It's anything that a general education student is entitled to participate in or be in. Children with disabilities have that same entitlement. You are a general education student first. You're a general education student who receives services based on your individualized education program. And in that IEP, you get supplementary aids and services, which are accommodations and which includes accommodations and modifications. And what we look at is the student's needs. It's always based on the student's need, the individual need of the student first. Next. And it's you, Missy.
Next is me. I do want to say that too, in the handout, there is from the Parent Center Hub, there's a really great link to a detailed article about supplementary aids and services. Probably one of the best ones I've seen, and I just found it recently after doing this for 7 years. So I'll refer you to that. But let's talk about who accommodations are for. So accommodations are for students with a disability who have an IEP or a 504 plan. Okay. They're for students without a disability who have barriers to learning. And when you talk about barriers to learning without a disability, children can have severe illnesses or allergies. They can have diabetes that affects, if it's not managed correctly, that affects their thinking and their brain, and that affects them in the classroom. So they can have accommodations. Students who receive English language learning services can have accommodations to help them be successful in their classrooms. And students who are at risk of failure And if any of you were on Peak Parents Conference on Inclusive Education this year, Shelley Moore would really tell you, she's out of Canada, a lovely lady, knows a lot about students with disabilities, that really accommodations are for any student that needs help in terms of taking in what they need to learn or expressing what they need to learn. We'll talk about that a little bit more here. Because accommodations, the reason they're for everyone is they change the how. They change a testing procedure. They change the way a student takes in information or the way a student demonstrates what they know, whether that's a test, a project, just expressing what have I learned about the topic you're asking me to learn. Accommodations do not change the instructional level, content, or performance criteria for meeting the standards. So that means anyone getting accommodations are still working at grade level standard. And that's why really accommodations could be for any student that needs to take in information differently or present it back to their teachers or fellow students differently. Some examples when we talk about accommodations: tests that are taken orally. So I have the same questions, but instead of reading them, the teacher or somebody else gives them to me orally and I answer them that way. Large print textbooks, still the grade level textbook, it has bigger font so I can read it. Additional time to take the test. I'm still being graded on the same content. It just takes me longer, either one, because it takes me longer to read what I have to read, or it takes me longer to think through the questions that I'm being asked, but I'm still being asked at the same content level. Giving students lockers with an adapted lock is an accommodation. Sending home a school communication notebook or logbook. That's an accommodation because just as if students need to be able to access the curriculum and they talk to their parents about what's going on at school, some students can't do that. So a homeschool communication book allows parents to continue their involvement in their students' education. So it's an accommodation. It doesn't change what the student learns, but it helps the parents be more involved. Peer support for note taking. There's things called buddy paper. So a peer can write notes at the end, they rip them off and they give them to the other student. Okay, a lab sheet where you highlight the instructions. Sometimes in the papers we get, there's so much content on a page that a student needs things highlighted so that they can look specifically for key information about what to do next. It's not changing what they need to do. It's just giving it a way to stand out to help them understand what they need to do. Graph paper to line up math problems. You know, sometimes it's not easy to get that decimal point where it belongs. So maybe if we put the numbers in a block. Using tape recorded lectures so students can listen to it over and over again. Same content, but I get to hear it more. Using a computer for writing. I'm not sure that's an accommodation anymore. Isn't that an expectation for everybody? And now I'll turn it over to Shirley to talk about what modifications are.
And modifications change the what of the students' learning. So you may be learning, you may be in math class, but you're not doing algebra. You're doing adding and subtracting because that's where you are with learning math. That's a modification. If you're doing work that is not on grade level, it is the same content, it's math, but it's at a different level of learning, and your expectations of learning are very individualized. So you're making progress in your content area. You're just not at the same level as the other students in that content area. You wouldn't be doing reading during math, and you wouldn't be doing math during reading, but you're doing it at the level that you need so that you can make progress. Next. So modifications are for students who have traditionally been pulled out and maybe, you know, in the significant needs room or something like that, but taught very separately. And they may have a very low incidence disability. That just means there aren't many students who are learning like they're learning in the school at that time. And accommodations have been tried, but you know, we're not going to be learning with just accommodated work. We need that truly individualized level for that student to be successful. Next. So some examples, some modifications are, instead of writing the whole essay, you make an outline of a story, and you use communication symbols. You use pictures instead of words, and there can be pictures on the test for you too. Alternative books and media on the same topic. So if you're learning about volcanoes, you may be watching YouTube videos about volcanoes and are being asked different questions than the other students about volcanoes. Spelling supports by computer check program. I'm not sure that's a modification anymore either with technology, but spell check for programs, or word prediction for programs. But learning how to use word prediction is a really important skill for a lot of students, especially with texting. A lot of children with intellectual disabilities not very good at spelling, but when they see the word, they could recognize it. And if you have a word prediction, they can pick that word. So learning how to use programs with word prediction can be a modification. Word bank choices for test answers. So you're going to have a choice of answers. So you don't have to think of the answer right away, but you're going to recognize it if you see it or if you hear it. Use a calculator for math, and learning to use a calculator for many students, especially with learning disabilities or with in math or with intellectual disabilities. It's really important to learn how to use that tool for your daily life. Film or video supplements to text. We talked about that, and that's the more multi tangible ways to learn something. See it, hear it, talk about it, you're going to get it better. So having more ways to get that information to you, so for your understanding, is a very important tool. Simpler language for test questions, and especially for students who are English as a second language too, don't have a really disability, but a simpler language so that you can really understand what does that mean. Projects substituted for written reports. So show me in a different way. So make an art project, do a collage about instead of a book report, do a collage about a book report. Things like that, where you're still looking to learn and to express our knowledge, but on the level that makes sense for the student. And keywords and phrases are highlighted. And a lot of students who can't take notes, that's a great modification. Sometimes it's simply an accommodation, but sometimes it's a modification. Next.
So just to summarize the high level difference so we understand, accommodations really can apply to all students. They do not fundamentally change the standards in terms of the content or the performance criteria that the students are learning to. The changes are made in order to provide equal access to learning and equal opportunity to demonstrate what they've learned. Their grading is the same. They are graded the same as all other students, okay? Modifications apply to students with disabilities, and they do fundamentally change the standards in terms of what instructional level or content or performance criteria that the student is expected to make. The changes are allowed to provide students meaningful and productive learning opportunities based on their individual needs and abilities. And their grading is different because their grading is then made based on what their alternate standard or performance measure is. Now, just because the grading is different, the students still can and should learn science and social studies and language arts and poetry and math and reading. So it doesn't change the subject matter that a student at X, Y, or Z grade level would work, but the level of that subject matter that they're going to learn. The really important thing is that we're still having high expectations for children, and we're making accommodations and modifications based on their individual needs. Accommodations focus on removing barriers to learning to that general education curriculum. They're designed for students who have barriers that can be removed and then easily help them absorb what they need to know. Modifications focus on ensuring meaningful participant for that student in the general education curriculum at the level that they're at, so meeting them where they are. And they're designed for students who would benefit from participation even in the general education curriculum, even if advanced chemistry is above their level, they could still learn about chemistry and cells and water, those kinds of still topics, okay? They just learn them at a different level.
Missy, I have a question. Can I interrupt?
Yes, please.
For modifications,
Mhm.
is it stated in the IEP that the grading is modified? How do I know if my child's grading is modified?
So that's a very good question. And if their standard of learning is modified, so let's say if they're learning at a lower level standard, and let me just give you an example from a situation that I'm familiar with. I have a daughter who is in 9th grade, but she reads at the 2nd grade level. So the fact is that her reading goal is against the 2nd grade level, and her grading is modified because they're saying, what is the progress she's making against reading at 2nd grade level, not at 9th grade level. So if the standard has been modified and then the student is being graded against that different standard, that's what makes the grading different. They're not allowing them to read at the 2nd grade level, but then saying, I'm sorry, you get an F because you can't read at the 9th grade level, if that makes sense. Hopefully that helped. Right back if it didn't and you need more clarification. Shirley's going to talk a little bit about who's responsible for making accommodations and modifications.
And who's responsible are both the special education teacher and the general education teacher. And actually it can be, part of a team decision. It can be part of the team because, but the two teachers, the general education teacher and special education teacher, it's ideal when they work together, making the accommodations and modifications. And a student can have both. If a student needs accommodations in one area, they can have it. They may need modifications in another area, and they can have it. And that's based on the student's unique and individual needs. So it's a great question to ask, though, the IEP team. What are the role and what job are you going to have in teachers in making the accommodations and modifications? Sometimes the two teachers will work together, and the general education teacher will say, we're studying volcanoes next week, and here's the vocabulary words we're going to be using. And the special ed teacher may say, what are the 5 big ideas? What are the 3 big main points that are important for this student to learn? And I'm going to modify some work for her to do around that. So working together, they can decide who's going to do what. Sometimes the general ed teacher says, it's easy enough for me just to make that modification. Now that I understand what she learns, this is what I want her to learn. So I'll just make a sheet for her to make sure that she gets the 5 big ideas that I think are important. Next.
Shirley, I just want to also touch on, I think the example you gave really was very good about thinking about our twice exceptional students. And sometimes those are the hardest kids to get accommodations and modifications for, because they do have areas that they excel, they're above grade level on. Yet that's the hard conversation that needs to have to say, yes, just because I'm excellent at math does not mean I'm so there at reading. And so making those adjustments by subject area, not only by student.
Absolutely. I agree. Okay. So what are the areas, or where can we make accommodations and modifications? The most, common: scheduling and timing. I can have extended time on a test, or I'm only going to do I'm just graded on the problems that I actually answered during the time, and the problems I couldn't get to are not held against my grade or not held against me. So sometimes scheduling and timing is something that we look at for making an accommodation. Setting is important. Some students, my son has a severe hearing loss and went through school with a hearing loss. So the setting or where he was in the classroom was really important for the function of his auditory, his FM system that he wore. And also for seeing the class and getting the conversation. He was one that he needed to be near the front of the room, but he needed to be at the side near the front of the room so that he could look around and look at the other students as they were talking, since he needed to see people's faces to really get the language. So setting was important to consider for him. Then the materials, that's important too. Some students can't take notes. My son couldn't take note because he needed to see you talking. And so he was provided with notes as he walked in the door, or he was provided with an outline. And sometimes skeleton notes, which are the War of 1812 is in blank, right in 1812. And so looking at, how can we get the information into him, and how is it meaningful for him? Instructional approaches. There are many students who you can discuss instructional approaches at the IEP meeting. And we get this question a lot around dyslexia and reading. And, can we say we want somebody who specializes in dyslexia? You can ask for that and have it in a discussion. It may not be called that, but the need, you talk about the need and what instructional approach does this student need to be a successful learner? Always ask that question. And then how's the student going to respond? Do we need an oral response or do we need a written response? What kind of, is it really necessary to write an essay, or can we have a multiple choice questions for this student? So looking at student response is really important. My son's biology teacher in high school said, and this was the general education biology teacher's observation and suggestion. He said, Michael doesn't take notes. We hand him notes, but sometimes those words look different than when you speak them. They look different on paper than they sound. And so if he misses a question in biology because he's listening and he's learning that way, if he misses a question, I'll ask him the question verbally. And if he gets the answer right, he gets credit. That's an accommodation because he recognized his learning style at that point. And then presentations. Some students, instead of giving an oral book report or written book report, can give a presentation by describing a collage that they put together about the book. Missy?
Yeah. So in the next several slides, we are going to go over a lot of different accommodations and modifications. But before you decide which ones help your child, you need to know why school is hard for your child. And how do we find out why? When our kids are old enough, we can ask them, what makes school hard for you? What might make it easier? You don't have to use the awkward words of accommodation or modification, but asking them open-ended questions. In the time of COVID, where so many of our kids have been learning online, it's hard because here we are as parents, we're not teachers, many of us, having to act or help or support more than we ever have before. And so you can also ask the teachers, this is a whole new world for me. My child's here with me 4 or 5 days a week, and I don't know what helps them. So what have you seen, teachers who've been with those students in the past, that have helped them? And how do we How do we adapt those accommodations and modifications for at home? So working together with your students, working together with your teachers, trying to figure out what works in this online world because it is so different. In each category, we're giving you what we call no-tech solutions, low-tech solutions, and high-tech. And the no-tech solutions really can be used anywhere, whether your students at home or at school. As I said, the handout we gave you has even more under all 6 categories, some ideas. But no-tech students, alerting students several minutes before transitions. And I have found, as a person having to sit next to my child for school, teachers are very good about that in live class. They have not been as good at that in many of them online. So that's something you can request if your student is still attending online. Hey, can you, and it will help all students, not just mine. Can you give us a 5-minute warning before the end of class or 10-minute warning just to get my student prepared for that transition? Using a school motto to frame expectations at home. We got a lot of calls this year about, wow, this conversion, this transition has been really hard because I don't know how to set up the school day expectations at home. And an example of that, if your school's motto is the model ROAR for respect, on task, attending, responsibility, what does that look like at home now that I'm learning at home versus what it looked like at school? Giving students work time and or self-advocacy incentives, meaning there's a reward if you work for 15 minutes at home. And you can do that at home just like they can at school. At school, they'll be like, well, read for 15 minutes, the book you have to read. And then for 3 minutes, you get to watch a video, something like that. Low tech, kitchen timers, Google timers, or Alexa and Siri if your kids are tech savvy. And when you think about that, think about, does my student need a visual timer? Do they need something they can see? In which case, Alexa and Siri might not be so helpful. Or do they need something more visual? There's really interesting iPad activities that are visual timers that you can even put with music. Like, hey, when we play Who Let the Dogs Out, that means it's time for you to go let the dog out. So fun things like that. High tech, embed brain and body breaks into content. We've had teachers that put, okay, we've been doing work for 30 minutes. Let's go take a zip trip to the virtual zoo. And they literally go to the Washington Zoo and look at the webcams of animals. That's a great brain break. 3-minute stretch break. Oh, we link to YouTube, the video. Let's all get up and stretch. Those visual scheduling apps. And website blockers to aid focus. I know a lot of families said this year was a challenge for their kids because they were on the computer, but they didn't really want to be doing schoolwork on the computer. So there's actually blockers that you can put that allow your students only to go to certain websites if that is something that you need. The setting where your student is engaged in school. Space with all of the tools ready, including fidgets, snacks, and drinks. Your space might not be a private space. It might be the kitchen table. We're all working with different circumstances this year. So if that's the case, just make sure you have a bag or a basket that at the start of the day, they get everything out of, and at the end of the day, they can put it all back. So we can make those shifts between it's school time, it's home time. Allowing students to work individually on or off the camera if that's a preference. Another place where we got calls from saying, my student doesn't mind doing online school, but they don't like to be on camera. They don't want to see themselves. And so having those negotiations, that's an accommodation. Okay. Low tech, reduce fluorescent lights or adding natural light. Some of us don't have the luxury to open some shades for a window. There's no window in the room. So if there's a light in there, you can think about altering the bulb colors. If you go to your Home Depot, you can talk to them. What is either more natural sunlight kind of thing that my student needs? Or for some kids, that's too bright. They don't want that. What's a more dim, softer color that will allow them to get their work and not be energized? Headphones and earbuds this year, I think, are a priority if we look at the number of families that are working from home, as well as their kids going to school. All the rings, the dings, the text messages, that's a lot and can really increase everybody's anxiety. So looking at, can we do headphones or earbuds for most people, or putting a white noise machine outside of a door so the other noises are quieter. Wobble chairs, exercise bands, those kinds of fidgets that a student may have access to at school. Two things. One, I heard a lot of schools were providing those for students at home, or there's a lot of really great do-it-yourself online activities on Pinterest that you can go to and learn how to make your own for your students. High-tech options, you know, kids with fine motor skills, sometimes they need a one-click mouse. The cost of laptops that have touch screens these days have, you know, decreased dramatically. So if that is a need that your student has, talk to your school about, can you get us a small laptop with a touch screen using a stylus, or even, I know from my daughter, she really liked seeing all the kids online, but then it made it very hard for her to look at the screen where her work was, because then she'd be mad because she couldn't see her students, or her peers, excuse me. So we were lucky enough, our device that we'd gotten for her was an iPad, and the school ended up providing a second touchscreen laptop, so she could actually see both at the same time. And then even instructing or testing in a small group setting during COVID, there's breakout rooms. They can do that. We have a note here, use that only as needed. And that's because it's been hard enough this year for all of us to be remote and not have access to our typical peers. So we only want to use breakout rooms as standalone tools as much as we need to. Shirley?
So some of the materials that we can use, you know, you can still use paper for lessons. And there are some students who really can't look at the computer all day long because it invokes or it causes seizures. So some of the, you know, you have to be very thoughtful of students and where they are and their needs. And you can like ask for copies of the teacher's notes. Parents can ask for copies of the teacher's notes for before and after. So because many parents are the learning coach right now. And when you're the learning coach, you need that information. And then two, parents can, you know, read in advance to better be a learning coach for their student. When my son was small, we had a list of vocabulary words that we would learn, new vocabulary words that we'd learn every on Friday. I would pick him up from school, elementary school. The teacher would have a list of words saying, we're going to study dinosaurs next week, or whatever it was. Here are some of the new words that he'll be hearing and learning. So we had a chance to practice those words at home before he went to school and heard the words. Other children might be hearing them for the first time, but they were already exposed. He was already exposed to those words. So advanced prepping of a student, just giving them that heads up was really an important learning tool for my son and for many children. Graphic organizers, Attitude Magazine, ADDITUDE magazine is a great magazine for students who have ADHD, but they just have some really good ideas about how to organize and how to motivate students. And graphic organizers, you know, get them in different color. Green is English, red is math, blue is science. Then it helps them another way to keep things straight for them. So this, you know, get pictures of other students and notes after class, have, you know, study groups or something like that. It helps. And when other students, when you can discuss it or when you can teach it to another student, you're learning it too. You're learning it again. So getting a reading guide showing 2 lines at a time, just it gives you a focus and you can see the words, and it helps you not get lost on the page. High-tech printing materials instead of reading online. You know, sometimes you just need that piece of paper there so that you can follow along with your finger if you need to. Google Read and Write, Windows Narrator, Those screen readers can be great, and all computers now have that available to students. Chrome extensions to reduce the clutter when reading and searching. It just cleans up your screen a bit so that you don't have that distraction. If you go to some pages with all those ads on there on the side, something gets really distracting, and it's really easy just to kind of click over here to kind of go down a rabbit hole. We don't want that. So it happens to me. Next.
Yep.
And okay, so instruction. So, you know, even online, or if you're online or if you're in school, you may need help with another person being there. And if you need sign language interpreter, you get sign language interpreter, even if you're online. You need that. Paras can be online to help a student study and help a student do work. And they can schedule their time to be there to help a student. Thinking time for on-the-fly discussion questions. Sometimes we have heard from parents that the teacher is going around or going down the list on the Zoom call going, okay, you know, what's your answer to this question? And the student who needs a little more time, she may be impatient or just will come back to you and go on to the next student. Well, you know, that kind of puts a barrier to learning for the student who needs that extra time thinking. So how can we prepare that student for a question instead of just giving it to them cold? How can we, you know, say, here's your questions. I'm going to ask, you know, I'm going to ask Missy this question. I'm going to ask Marina this question. And I want you to think about it. So when it's your turn, you have something to say, but this is your question. And, you know, just to prepare you for it. That way, they have a time they can participate because they've been given that prep time to think about that. And then scheduled check-ins, you know, how are you doing? How's school going for you? Did you have a good weekend? And just having that personal time to check in to see if there's some struggles or what's going on with them, but to let them know that they're not just forgotten at home. They are a real student that we are concerned about as a teacher, but also, you know, parents too. I'll check back with you in 3 minutes. See how much work you can do in 3 minutes. And parents too can check in and out. We have gotten calls about students not wanting to have their cameras on all the time. And teachers are going, how do I know if you're doing your work? Sometimes you just have to you have to trust that it's going to get done. And you have to trust that there's an adult in the house that is kind of keeping tabs on them too. So you can say, you know, we just can't have the camera on all that time. We will check in every 15 minutes. We'll check in after, you know, the lesson's done. We'll check in at the top of the hour. You make a plan for check-ins. For one thing, that too prepares the student so they know that they're going to be turning on their camera at that time. And that preparation is empowering to the student too. Simplify and write out multi-step directions. You know, we just kind of get lost in the process sometimes. So just making it simpler takes that stress away. Some high-tech things, Microsoft Quick Assist for paras to control the laptop remotely. That's when paras can check in on a student and can help individual students at a time, and turn on closed captioning for Zoom, or, you know, and for the meetings. Closed captioning can really help, especially students who have trouble with language or hearing loss, to keep up with the conversation. And record lessons for replay and review. We are in the, you know, age of technology now where that's just part of it. but it really is a nice part of it because you can go back and hear it again. And attach a speaker to a device. So you aren't just listening sometimes through earbuds, or you're listening in a room by yourself, but you can have more freedom from the device if you need it. Missy?
Yeah, thank you, Shirley. So student responses, how some ways to alter how our students show what they learn. Shirley gave the example, allowing answers to be given orally or using somebody described for students who can't write. Varying your test approach using recognition, which is like multiple choice, true or false, and matching instead of requiring a whole essay. Allowing alternate responses for homework, draw a picture, doing a multiple choice type of things, fill in the blank. I know, like when Krista was learning in middle school, my daughter, when they were learning about the human body, Krista just learned about cells. What does a cell look like? And she was able to draw a picture of it. So there's an example of kind of what her responsibility was for the cells of a body versus the kids learning about all the different parts and their definitions and how they fit together, etc. Replacing summative assessment, so those big long tests, with an oral report or a project. Some of the high-tech solutions, allowing nonverbal students to respond in the chat box. I saw one teacher this year that was quite good at understanding, not just to always ask a question and get an answer verbally, but to say, get ready for the question, then I'm going to give you 2 minutes all to think about your response. I want you to put it in the chat box and then hit enter when I tell you, so they could all submit at the same time. So those kids that needed more thinking time got some. Recording a video to tell what you know. There's a tool called Flipgrid. So some kids don't want to speak in front of others here in this technology world, but they're willing to record their video and play their video for you. Speech to text and text to speech apps and browser extensions. And those are the kinds of things, that closed captioning, those are the tools that I said, even if your child doesn't have a disability, it might help them to see those words along with the teacher's lecture while they're hearing it and seeing it at the same time. We can all sometimes use more input instead of less. Finally, area 6, the presentation of materials, increasing the white space on a page. White space is how much blank area there is. Sometimes we just cram too much together. We're trying to save paper. Well, for some kids, they might need more white space. Using symbols on the test form so that they know how far they're supposed to go, when they're supposed to stop, when they're supposed to yield, where the directions are, put an arrow there. Asking less questions, but selecting them to measure all required content. This is an interesting one because we get a lot of families that might call and say, my student is able to learn the content, but there is just so much homework and they are overwhelmed by the end of the day. They are exhausted and overwhelmed. If you have a math test that has 20 questions, but 10 of them can cover the full level of content, that's an accommodation to give them less content. To give them less questions. It's still covering all the measured curriculum. They just don't have to do as many practice problems. Eliminating choices in a multiple choice item is an accommodation for students that have disabilities, giving them less to choose from. Using pictures along with words, symbol sticks. That's a concept that's done by an organization called News to You. They make news with pictures, and teachers can actually get access to those symbols and make up their own worksheets. So, and Shirley already mentioned the browser extensions to clean up the web pages. Sorry, I just want to be cognizant of our time. So we're talking about why are we using these approaches? We want to remove barriers to learning and to demonstrate mastery. Accommodations keep the standards for the student the same, but the approaches to teaching and teaching back or explaining what they know is different. Modifications may change the expectations and instructional level. So we just want to keep expectations high for all students. That is the most critical piece. Just a quick review of what's in your handout. We gave you more details on the law, including what we call the 3 power paragraphs about least restrictive environment and supplementary aids and services. There is much more depth on the low-tech no, low, and high-tech accommodations and modifications. There's a technology toolkit page, which highlights many places where we got a lot of our ideas from, which go into even more depth, and a resource list about where you can learn more about all the topics that we have talked about. Want to highlight one thing for next year is just our conference next year is February 10th and 11th, 2022. Don't know if it will be live or remote, but please save the date. We would love to see you live. We hope we're going to get to. Any questions?
Nothing in the chat right now, Missy.
Okay.
Thank you. We did record this webinar and we'll post it to our website under archived webinars in the next few weeks. To request a certificate of completion, please email me, Pam Christie at PCHRISTY@peakparent.org, pchristie@peakparent.org. Thank you to our wonderful presenters, Missy and Shirley, everyone attending. Thank you, Maddie, for offering our Spanish translation. And if you have any questions, please contact any parent advisor at Peak. Here's our information. Thank you, Missy. Here's our phone number. Here's our website. Here's Shirley's and Missy's email addresses. And make sure you like us on Facebook. That's where we post, and Twitter and any of our social media. That's where we post a lot of our upcoming events. And then check our website frequently. On behalf of Peak Parent Center and today's presenter, thank you for joining us and have a great day.